All right, how was that?
All right, how was that?
All right,
All right, so
all right, here we go. Let me um let me go ahead and do this joint like this. So we're gonna talk about ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, and their method of esotericism, their method of entering into what I call altered states of consciousness. Um, and so the Egyptians, the Kemites, they didn't see the divine as merely an object, something that was distant to be worshipped, right? They all of life, everything that is in existence was a part of the divine, right? And then they were able to enter into altered states of consciousness directly, right? And so we can see that from the earliest dynastic periods, right? There were ritualists, there were priests that understood that there was a line between the boundaries of human awareness and the realm where the Neteru could be crossed, right? This is what they understood. The and trance states were not accidental, right? There was a learned, they learned how to enter directly into trance, right? And then, so this is going to set the stage for everything that's going to be discussed today, right? So, um, different scholars had said that before there were vast temple libraries, you know what I'm saying? Before there were the lector priests that were reciting from ancient scrolls, there was the sim priest, right? The figure who acted ritually with the body and the breath, right? The sim priest was the one that went into the altered state of consciousness in order to contact the divine essence within, right? Now, we got to look at the origin of this because it matters to us. It tells us the Kemetic magic, uh, Kemetic ritual wasn't born from text, right? It was born from lived ritual trance experience, right? So this is what was being practiced within the temples. This is part of the rituals and traditions that the Africans in general practice, that people can engage in order to contact and reach different states, right? So the Sim priest was a shaman, right? And it's not, and by calling him a shaman, it's not borrowing new age descriptions, new age discussions in order to describe an ancient role, right? The Sim priest, as the shaman, uh, was just that in its own right and in its own context, right? And then it's like shamans across the world cultures, right? The Sim priest entered into an altered state, traveled in spirit, made contact with what they considered non-human powers and returned with that authority of that contact, you know. And so he was inspired, meaning literally that the divine breath entered him. And then we're gonna see how this somatic. We're gonna look at how this shamanic trance worked, and then that it never really fully disappeared from Kemetic religion, right? It was just layered beneath the more familiar priestly forms, right? So There was this dream culture that the Kemites established, that and then they treated the dream trance has something like an actual procedure, right? Not like image. The body, what they would do is the body would remain on the ritual floor, but it's the consciousness. It would be the ba, the soul element that would be capable of travel. So when people are talking about the different levels of the body within the Kemetic religion, the ba is very tangible. The ba is literally that aspect of the self that is capable of transmutation and travel in the dream state. That is the ba, right? And so, and then this would be this idea of transformation in the dream state. It would be what the Greek magical papyri, which is a misnomer. It should be the Egypto the Greco-Egyptian. It should be called Greco-Egyptian because it's not Greek, or Egypto-Grecian papyri, because and when you read it, it reads like an Egyptian magic papyrus, right? But this is what it would call the ascent, the rising or the going forth, right? It's this dream, the sim priest dream trance like state, right? That this whole entire visionary tradition kind of grows from. Now, Jan Assman, right? Um, he traces how Egyptian religion moved from charismatic to institutional, right? And that the ecstatic vision of the sim priest became encoded in liturgy, song and dance, temple construction, architecture, and it became regulated inside rhythms and festivals, right? So, and then to put it in its form, it didn't destroy it, right? So, it just codified it, right? It didn't destroy the trance, it didn't destroy the mystical, metaphysical tradition in Kemet. It just transformed it, right? It shifted, and it also shifted the authority from the visionary individual, from the charismatic visionary individual, to the institution, right? And this transition shapes all of the later Egyptian or Kemetic magical practices. Hold on one second. Getting a little distracted here. Give me a moment. Right. Okay. So then we also have what's called the Herieb priest. Right. You got the Sim priest, then you got the Arieb priest, which was the lector priest, right? And this is the person that most readers will think of when they imagine the Kemetic priest, right? This is the robed, shaven priest, the bald headed priest that would be reading from the papyrus scroll, right? Um, Scholars have shown how this office grew in importance, has our Kemet's bureaucratic culture expanded, has it became more bureaucratic, right? The lecture priest didn't go into trance to access power. He read it from the scroll. So it's kind of like biblical to a degree, right? And then for the lector priest, power power had legibility, right? Power came from the written canon, right? And it's fundamental to understand this shift that happened within the Kemetic religion, because power changed, right? From experience to liturgical regulation, right? What magic became, or what magic was in Egypt's classical periods, Kemet's classical period, right? Um, Kemetic magic is performative, right? Kemetic magic acts through speech, gesture, and material substance. That's what it is, right? Um, but when it came to the lector priest, this was all done through text, right? He doesn't, the lector priest doesn't leave the body, right? He doesn't need to leave the body. He articulates the words of power. He gives the magical words with precision, right? So, but that's not saying that he completely erased the role of the sim priest, and that, but it does mean that trance no longer monopolized. You didn't have to go into trance in order to access divine power, right? So then now what we're getting, or what we're seeing, is there's twin traditions running within the Kemetic spiritual traditions. There is the ecstatic experiential tradition, and then there's the textual tradition. There's the textually controlled tradition, right? So in the book of Jehudi, right, which is a demotic era um text, they still that still shows initiated practitioners, people that were initiated into the Kemetic mysteries, enter into altered states of trance, right? So trance in Kemetic spirituality doesn't vanish, right? It goes and it migrates, it changes and it transforms into a literary tradition, right? And this matters because, like, literature doesn't invent the practices, right? It reflects what the audience already knows. The literature reports and are encodes the traditions and the rituals that everybody in the Kemet was already familiar with, right? Magical trance, right? That's what the tradition encodes. And trance like states are familiar states to Kemetic practitioners, right? There's something called the Inaros cycle. You should look this up, right? Inaros is what I consider and what looks like to be a precursor to the story of Enoch, right? So, and Inaros is a demotic, Inaros is literature from the demotic time period, from demotic's period, right? And it has stories in it that has heroes and magicians, right? Uh, and then there is a passage where the scribe in the Inaros tale, there's a passage where the scribe goes into trance, right? And and observes the gods. In the Inaros cycle, it shows, it discusses the scribe going into trance, and it talks about it as if though it's already like a literary fact, right? And it says, right, uh the smile, it says, in trance described consciousness is described as rising like smoke, right? Smoke rises, it's light, it's fragrant, vertical, it dissolves boundaries, right? When something is smoky, you know what I'm saying? And so in Egyptian incense ritual, smoke was the medium by which prayers ascended to the gods, right? To say consciousness rises like smoke, it says consciousness rises like smoke. When it says consciousness rises like smoke, to align the inner experience of trance with the outer ritual of incense. So consciousness rises like incense rises, consciousness rising out of the body in order to contact, in order to enter into altered states of consciousness, right? The body becomes the incense holder, and then your conscious awareness rises like smoke, right? So basically, that's a sophisticated way of talking about a psycho spiritual experience, right? Um, Eric Horning, right? said that the Egyptians, the Kemites, envisioned cosmic levels as porous and real. There is a veil between heaven and earth, but this veil is porous. This veil is permeable. This veil has can be slipped into consciously through the right practices, through the right techniques, through ritual, right? And that basically means entering into trance like states. Now, the trance doesn't get rid of the distinction. The trance doesn't take away the distinction between the two worlds, right? But it crosses it temporarily. That's what ecstatic meditation does, and that's what is being described by Eric Hornum in his essays on Egyptian thought, right? So in Naros, when he goes into this trance, he sees the divine council, right? It's a tribunal. He sees a tribunal of gods deciding cosmic outcomes. So he's able to witness the gods as they are in council, as they are in communication with one another, right? Now, he was able to, in while in trance, the scribe was able to witness the inner workings of reality. He was able to see the gods at work, right? Now, this is something that only is reserved normally for the king. Hold on one second. Only is reserved normally for the king. Hold on one second. Um, because the king was considered a living Heru, right? But the fact that a private scribe can achieve this through trance is telling us that it was accessible. The divine realm was accessible to more than just royalty, right? And that there were techniques that was known to the populace that can be engaged in order to witness the gods, so to speak, right? And there was uh, um, a persistent conviction that the Kemetic priest could become uh, had access to secret knowledge, right? That later traditions will call this secret knowledge gnosis and become Gnostic in its discussion, right? And in Inaros, the fact that the conversations of the gods are secret, that means hidden. What Inaros shows you is that by entering into trance, you have access to the conversation of the gods, or you have access to the inner workings of the universe. You can become, in modern terms, attuned to the flow of the universe, right? And this sentiment is what the later tradition of Kemetic initiation was about. It was about revealing to you the role of the divine essence in your daily life. This was the Kemetic tradition, right? There's a 2-volume work on incubation surveys in the ancient world and how that worked in Kemet. The seeker, um, whoever did this, didn't simply come and hope to receive a dream. He or she went to a designated place, performed prescribed rites and rituals, and then went to sleep with intent. And this incubation period, right? This incubation is structured trance, falling somewhere between waking ritual and then this like ordinary sleep, right? And this was widely practiced in Egypt. Basically, going to sleep to receive a dream from the gods, to receive communication from the gods. This was a well known practice in ancient Kemet back in the day, you know. And so, and this is especially known to be practiced in Kemet, and especially the temples of Aset. We know this to be done in the temple of Serapis, and we know this to be done with the deified Imhotep. There's also a classic study of Egyptian temples or Kemetic temples that says that shows that they were not only places of public of public praise and public worship, right? But that they had inside of them inner chambers, secret spaces for people to get initiated into. They had rooms where people could go into isolation and meditate in order to contact and reach the divine essence within, right? So, and this can be found in Sonoron's The Priest of Ancient Egypt, looking at the spiritual side of the performative functions within the temples, right? The architecture itself was made so that there could be spiritual contact inside spiritual contact inside the temples. It was built, the temples were literally built to host visions, right? It wasn't just for statues, right? Um the Archive of Horus is one of the most fully documented individual practitioners we have from any period, right? His archive is a personal collection of administrative and visionary records, right? And it describes incubating dreams, not only in the Ibis galleries, but at the tomb of the bull of Heliopolis. And the bull was the sacred bull of the sun god. Sleeping there was sleeping at the body of the god itself. Seeking solar oracle, seeking initiation into divination, into the path of the divine, right? So sleep incubation was personal and authoritative, right? It wasn't just ceremonial theater, right? They were showing you a specific way to enter into an altered state of consciousness, right? Um, Fowden, this person named Garth Fowden, showed how there were fasting practices that the Kemetic people fasted in order to access the divine, right? Now, across cultures, fasting, we know that fasting tends to, it's reported that fasting produces shift in consciousness, right? You change the glucose levels in your body. Your other senses become heightened. You begin to hear and see and taste as you meditate um, more deeply. There's like a purification that goes on, right? And our ancestors, you don't really need biochemistry. You don't really need biological sciences to know this. You just need to do it and experience it, right? So our ancestors observed this directly, and understanding its benefit and being able to scientifically observe it, they built it into ritual preparation for reception, right? To approach to approach the gods, to approach the divine essence, you had to first prepare your body and your mind, right? In priest tongues and rites, uh, there's a study of the magical papyri that shows that the priests isolated themselves to receive the vision, right? And it's an understanding that the mind cannot perceive the divine while there is constant chatter going on the inside. There has to be external as well as internal peace. So, seclusion, isolation would be to be depriving yourself of the social sphere in order to sharpen your understanding of the divine essence within and without. Right? Isolation was a necessity in order to contact the divine. Right? And so there was also different types of tools that the Kemetic brothers and sisters would use, right? Specific instruments, right? Like bowl divination, right? There's the Greek and demotic magical papyri talk about, they have detailed practices on lamp and flame and bowl divination, right? The flame and the water are not only just the symbols, but they help focus your attention, right? Modern psychology calls this fixation induced trance, right? Now, the Kemites perfected this a millennia, like thousands of years before laboratory confirmed the study of this mechanism, right? How to fix your attention on a single spot in order to enter into an altered state of trance, right? So, bowl divination, right? Here's a detailed description of bowl divination. The priest chooses a clean bowl and then purifies it, cleans it. The vessel is filled with clean water, a thin layer of oil added to enhance the surface. The priest recites the divine names and calls the god to appear. Then he gazes without blinking. As the mind quiets, the image takes form, and then divination occurs. Right? This is documented in dozens of magical procedures inside this papyrus, right? And the bowl is not optional. It's the medium through which this divination occurs. So it's what today's scientists would call a rendering surface. All right. And then there are other ritual texts that catalogs or talks about the importance of anointing oils. Oils that weren't only perfumes, but were substances that were applied to the eyes, to the face, the crown, and then they had within them the, they had psychoactive elements that all carry like theological weight, right? And so to be the anointing, to be anointed was to be marked as a vessel ready to receive the divine, right? The Pharaoh was anointed when he was coronated, right? And the priest was anointed before approaching the sacred altar. With magical amulets, rings were treated as portable ritual machines, right? They were engraved with the right names, dipped in the right substances, worn at the right moment. And then the ring was thought to have an impact on consciousness directly. So the Greek magical papyrus preserves the use of such ring procedures, right? So the ring would be considered spiritual technology, small, wearable, portable, able to take it with you wherever you want it to get the protection of the divine, but also to serve as a mnemonic reminder of the divine essence within, right? So in both late Kemetic and early Hermetic teachings, there is an insistence that the divine essence comes into a quieted vessel, into a still body, into a still mind. The Kemetic idea of the silent man, it was called the Germa, the silent man. That's the meditation, initiation tradition within Kemet, the silent one. That that's truly, the teachings of Ptahotep. Discuss it without actually describing it in that way, right? You got to see it within there. Search up Gurma and understand that it's the silent one that one was to become. It's the silent one that one was to be when you found yourself inside the temple. You were to be the silent one who has internal control over over the self, right? Watching the words, watching the mind, watching the thoughts, watching the actions. Thinking before speaking. The original Stoicism, where the Greeks and the Romans got the idea of Stoicism, are the internally structured man and woman, right? That's where they got it from, right? And then in the Kemetic priest, right, was tranquil. The Kemetic priest was calm, right? But this calmness wasn't passivity. It was structured action. It was acting out what needed to be acted out in its time, right? And then for the Kemetic priest understood that the agitated mind, the agitated heart was unfocused, had no rudder, had no path in front of them. And so the Kemetic priests focused on structuring the mind, focused on silencing the thought, focused on controlling the emotions so that he or she could have a directed consciousness, right? And this is what the inner technology was paired with. All right, y'all. I gotta run, but I'm gonna come back with some more. I got this whole presentation worked out. So hope you enjoy it, and peace, peace.